book, and then he's got some things to say, and we're going to do some of that stuff this morning. Virtually all the entire afternoon is going to be spent on steps 4 through 9. We're going to do a bunch of stuff, have some fun with a process we call Theater of the Lie, in which you get a chance to kind of see inventory come alive. You get a chance to see what you're up against. And then tomorrow the whole morning is going to be devoted to the strict spiritual disciplines of steps 10, 11, 12. But I would like to read something. This is from a book called 365 Dao Daily Meditations. It says, practice. It says, spiritual success is gained by daily cultivation. If you practice for the day, then you have won. If you are lazy for the day, then you have lost. Self-cultivation is the heart of spiritual attainment. Gaining insight and ability is not a matter of grand statements, dramatic initiations, or sporadic moments of enlightenment. Those things are only highlights in a life of consistent activity. Whatever system of spirituality you practice, do it every day. If it's prayer, then pray every day. If it's meditation, then meditate every day. If it is exercise, then exercise every day. Only then will you be able to say that you're truly practicing spirituality. This methodical approach is reassuring in several ways. First, it provides you with a process and a means to maintain progress even if that particular day is not inspiring or significant. Just to practice is already good. Secondly, it gives you a certain faith. If you practice every day, it is inevitable that you will gain from it. Thirdly, constant practice gives you a certain satisfaction. How can you say to yourself you have truly entered a spiritual path unless you can look back on years of daily practice and take comfort in the momentum that it has given you? Unbeknownst to me, every area of my life, including spiritual practices, the effect produced by alcohol, which was instantaneous and very spiritual in nature, I thought should happen with everything I've ever done in my life. You know, start work on Monday and you should be CEO by Friday. You want to lose some weight on Monday and it's not off by Friday. And just, you know, I didn't know that. I was asleep to that's how I came at everything. The idea of years of practice just did not have a lot of appeal to me. Because again, I'm looking for effect, if you will. So one other thing I want to read, it's called The Donkey. I don't know if you all know this, but you all rode a donkey here this morning. So it's called Donkey. Dismount your donkey. It says some places in this world are very hard to climb, and people use animals. Each person can only ride one, and each animal might have a different name. The riders go up the trail in different orders, and they will discuss their varying opinions about their experiences. Consider like going through the steps, right? Your home group, whatever. They may even have conflicting opinions. Can you imagine? One traveler may think the trip thrilling, another may find it terrifying, and a third may find it boring. At the summit, though, all the travelers are going to stay in the same place. Each of them has the same chance to view the same vista. The donkeys, meaning the steps, however you got to the summit, are then put to rest and graze. They're not needed anymore. We all travel the path to God. The donkeys are the various doctrines that each of us embrace. What does it matter what doctrine we embrace as long as it leads us to the summit? Your donkey might be a Zen donkey. Mine might be a Dao donkey. There's Christian, Islamic, Jewish, even agnostic donkeys. Let's see, in AA there's 1, 2, 3, 12 donkeys. There's doing the steps as outlined in the big book donkeys. There's back to the basic donkeys. There's one step a year donkeys. There's all kinds of donkeys. There's meeting maker donkeys. Okay? There's just don't drink and go to meeting donkeys. It says, why poke fun at others over the name of their donkey? Aren't you riding one yourself? We need to put aside both the donkeys and our interim experiences once we arrive at the summit. Whether we climbed and suffering or joy is immaterial, we are there. All religions have different names for the ways of getting to the holy summit, but once you reach the summit, you no longer need names, and we can experience all things directly. So let's all leave our donkeys aside this weekend and for an open mind and an open mind and a new experience. I want to talk about, for lack of a better word, I'll call it methodology, a donkey, a discipline, a practice. How do I work with the considerations of the first three steps? We talked last night, for those of you who weren't here, we talked about the idea of, call it the zero step, call it the step before the step, but to sit with some questions before you go through this process of the steps. And one of those questions was, do I want to do this? And you get to decide that. Nobody can decide that for you. So do I want to do this? Why do I want to do this? That's always a great question. Why do I want to do this? Why do I want to do the steps? And then we talked about willing to go to any length. And we painted a clear picture of what that looks like, willing to go to any length. If you answer the first two questions and you're satisfied with that, willing to go to any length means that we're going to look at the first step. You know, do I have an illness of the body? Am I physically powerless over alcohol once I take a drink? Do I have an obsession of the mind? In my direct experience, have I committed the most insane act sober when I didn't want to? Do I suffer from what the big book calls the spirituality, untreated alcoholism? Do I know what that looks like? We're going to look at that. Step one, Step two. Two parts to the second step. Are you going to be willing to believe there's a power greater than yourself? You're faced with a self-imposed crisis. Are you going to be willing to choose that power is everything in your life? We're going to look at the third step, and are you convinced that any life based on self-will cannot and will not work? And we're going to talk about that probably quite a bit here this weekend, because you really come up against that when you get some time away from alcohol and your life gets better. And if you're convinced of that, then we're going to finally look at the idea of what's really wrong with us. And I got bad news for those of you who think alcohol or drugs is your problem. Your problem is selfishness and self-centeredness. And they go on and they really start to amp us up a little and say that, as a matter of fact, they're so audacious that they're going to tell us that at some point in time we made decisions based on self, which places us in a position to be hurt every time. Not occasionally. Every time. And that all of our troubles of our own making. All A-L-L. It's... Boy, who wants to hear that? Maybe it has something to do, with my race or gender or mom or dad or all. It's like, what does that mean? It says, well, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about another sentence, which I find somewhat important, seldom talked about in our halls, is that above everything, you and I have to get rid of selfishness, or it's going to kill me. That's very seldom a topic in meetings. I think think about it's going to kill you, and we don't talk about it, right? You don't think they meant above it. Now, I had a guy say to me one time, well, what does above everything mean? Or selfishness is going to kill us, and, we got to embrace the idea that only God can make that possible. See, and you got to talk about this and they're willing to go to any length, because if you got some struggles with God, you might not want to go through this process. And then we're going to talk about a third step decision, bottom of page 62, and a 4-part relationship in that decision. We're going to talk about the third step prayer, which is not the decision. The prayer is going to be an affirmation of the decision. Do you want to do that? There's no amen behind the prayer, because you're going to open up a stream of action and a stream of consciousness, which is why the book is going to warn you very heavily. You better think very well before taking this step, making sure you're ready. Ready for what? Ready to do 4 through 12. Better sit down. You don't think about this. You're willing to go to your length. You're willing to do this. You're willing to submit and surrender to this ahead of everything else in your life. And we're gonna write 3 inventories: a resentment inventory, 4 column. Who we're angry at, people, institutions, and principles. Why and how that affected us. Hurt, threaten, or interfere. What 7 areas of self? then we're going to disregard that, and we're going to take a look at what's called a fourth column. Where are we at fault? Disregard the other person completely. It's our inventory, not theirs. We're the ones that are going to die. Then we're going to write a fear inventory, Imagine that. Tough, macho drunks going to write a fear inventory, Oh, this won't take long. Days and weeks later, And then we're going to write a sex inventory, another area that I seldom ever hear discussed in Alcoholics Anonymous. I can't never figure that one out either, but we are going to talk about that this weekend, this sex inventory. Lists, you get tired of making lists and answering a whole bunch of questions, and then we're going to talk about you're going to take that and you're going to read it to somebody. Are you willing to do that? And Joe and I are going to suggest an experience to some of you, which is outlined in the big book, that you read your inventory to more than one person. And then as a result of reading that inventory, we have come face to face with a lot of defects that our ego uses to operate in the world. And we put a name to them. And we see how they drive and dominate our life in the sixth step. And then in the seventh step, we are basically going to ask our Creator to remove that from all of us, good and bad. Am I willing to do that? And in the eighth step, we're going to spend some time, we're going to make a list of all the people we've harmed. There's that all word again. All the people I owe money to. All the people I've stole from. All the people I robbed emotional security from. And the list goes on and on and on. We're going to make that list, and we're going to be very thorough with that list. Mother Earth. How many of you have ever littered? Raise your hands. Did you ever consider you owe Mother Earth an amends? Yes. Some of you have. So we're going to make a list of all the amends, and then we're going to go make the amends. We're going to pay all the money back. We're going to go find these people. We're going to get on the internet. We're going to call friends. We're going to get on a mission. See? Kind of like the Blues Brothers. We're on a mission from God. And you're going to keep that in the forefront of your consciousness until it's done, the approaches are made. And are you willing to do that? It's like, well, I don't know. My life's pretty comfortable. I owe a little money. I don't know if I want to do that or not. Hey, it's your deal, not my deal. But that's what we're going to do if you're willing to go to any lengths, right? And then we're going to talk about the 10th and 11th step. And if you're willing to go to any length, what that means is you're only going to get 3 hours sleep, and you're going to meet with two other guys at 6 a.m. in the morning, and you're going to spend some time in prayer and meditation, whether you want to or not. It's like, I still laugh about that. You know what I'd rather been doing at 6 this morning? Not sitting there with Mike and Ken. Now, like everything else in spiritual living, when I got to the other side of that meditation, I was so grateful that Mike asked me last night and Ken asked me if we could do that together. I was so grateful. That is not how I was experiencing that at 5:30 this morning when the alarm went off. Are you willing to do that? Are you willing to sit in meditation? Willing to work with the disciplines of 10 and 11? Then, you're willing to spend the rest of your life trying to be a service to God and your fellow human beings in the 12th step, being inconvenienced and running here and going there. And, geez, Mark, I just don't want to drink, Yeah. Isn't this a bit much here, You're getting a little carried away on us, are you, buddy? It's just, I just prefer not to drink and go to meetings. And so, well, unfortunately, that doesn't work. And if you've been sober for a time, you're up against a whole other set of stuff, right? So that's what we looked at. For those of you who weren't here last night, am I willing to go to any length? And at least at this point in time, I think you all have a clear picture of what that looks like, right? See, and now you get to decide, do you want to do that? So, again, the first step proposition. Let's see. Die an alcoholic death or do what Mark just talked about. I don't know. Let me think about that a little bit. And because that's what we do, right? And I'll tell you why. It's a first step reservation. Because we don't think all the stuff that willing to go to any length, as it's outlined in the big book, we don't think doing that or not doing that has anything to do with whether we drink or not or lead any kind of a life with power, peace, happiness, and a sense of direction. If you'll hear one thing from me this weekend to remember, here's what it is. If you want to know what you believe in, look at your actions. Do not pay any attention to what your mind tells you. Oh, I'm spiritual and I'm this and over here screwing people over. It don't fit in the same box. So this weekend, sit and look at your actions to tell you where you're at with the first step. Do you need power? Those kinds of things. Example, this may make it a little clearer. when Joe and I talk about steps 10 and 11 on Sunday morning, you'll see in there that the book says we need to be doing this every day. So here would be a question you could ask yourself. Just take the last 14 days and ask yourself, what have you done with the disciplines of 10 and 11 in the last 14 days? And if you find that you only did something 2 or 3 days out of the 14, I submit to you that you are having some first step reservations. You are resting on your laurels, see? My laurels are what I did yesterday. I woke up today, it's all new. I've never been in this moment before in my life. I've never experienced this breath. I've never experienced you. I've never experienced Joe in this moment. Never. I can't rest on the laurels. When I closed my eyes last night, that was it. It was done. My spiritual life was over. I woke up today, started all over again with Mike and Ken. Thank God. See? Thank God I did. Fit spiritual condition. Great. New day. Get to start all over. Not resting on the laurels of yesterday. It doesn't matter. Right? So that's all the kind of stuff that we looked at. So let's go back to what I'll call the basic mechanics of the first 3 steps. Doctor's opinion to page 23. You take the big book, you turn statements into questions, and really what you're doing is looking at one thing and one thing only, and that is that when I take a drink, do I lose power, choice, and control over how much I drink? There's a total of 33 pages there. You got the doctor's opinion is 10 pages long. Some of the most important information in the entire book about your first step. A man who has tremendous experience with us, who told us what was wrong through observation. As far as I can tell, everything medical science has come up with as I sit here this morning actually confirms the doctor's observations about what's wrong with us. This idea that we take a drink and the drink takes us because we break out in a phenomenon called craving and we don't know why. Well, they do know why today. Our DNA is a little bit different than other people's. They have a device in them in which they'll have a drink or two, and their physical body says, stop, this is not good for you. No more is needed. Pass. We have things to do tomorrow. And they walk away. We don't have that little guy. See? We take a drink, and it just explodes into, my God, I wonder how many bottles of wine they got back there. God, where have you been? I've been longing for you today. You know, just 20 years later, you know, he's still talking to you. Because of a phenomenon called craving. You take the drink and the drink takes you. And you're going to look at that in those pages. And you got, of course, Bill's story. First 8 pages in Bill's story. Do you think, drink, and feel like Bill? To identify. Am I like Bill? Pages 9 up through 16 are Bill's recovery. Am I willing to do what Bill did? And then Bill also described the promises that manifest as a result of doing what it was that he did. So then from there you're going to go up through bottom of page 22, top of page 23, and looking at the physical body stops. And then ask yourself a question. Does your experience abundantly confirm that you are like these people? Does this happen to you? And if yes, then you know you're physically powerless. Pages 23 to 43 is where you're going to come face to face with this idea that the main problem of the alcoholic centers in the mind rather than in the body. You begin to get the feeling in pages 23 to 43 that there's an explanation as to why the big book does not spend much time talking to you and I about drinking alcohol. It's because that's not the problem. The problem is that sober, I have a mind that takes me back to alcohol based on what alcohol does to me once it's in my body, which is I lose control. And I begin to suffer these consequences. And there's 20 pages there, and those 20 pages and are designed to convince you of something, and that is that the most insane thing you're ever going to do, you're going to do sober, and there's nothing you can do about it at certain times. It's going to go on and tell you that you've lost the power of choice in drink sober. Pay attention. 23 to 43 are talking to you about the state of consciousness you're in this morning. You are sober. And it's trying to impress upon you you've lost the power of choice in drink sober. And it goes on to tell you why. I'll elaborate a little on this issue. Choice comes from will. Big Book says at certain times your will is unavailable to you. So there were some of you in here who said you're choosing not to drink today. If choice comes from will, and I strongly suspect it does, how do you have a choice in drinking if your will is unavailable to you? That's why it says that in there. It says at certain times you're going to be able to bring into your consciousness with sufficient force, which is where choice comes from, the suffering humiliation of a week or a month ago. You are without defense against the first drink. You don't think they meant without defense, do you? And it goes on further, and for those of you who have this idea of thinking it through, it talks about a state of consciousness, and I'll bet everyone here has experienced it, where you do not think at all. You do not think at all. And then you're pounding on the bar saying, how did I get here? You do not even think at all. And you begin to look at your experience and say, my God, did these things happen to me? And they talk about that crazy jaywalker, you know, in and out of AA and in and out of treatment centers and sanitariums, and, you know, keeps jumping out and jaywalking, keeps getting hit by the fire truck and saying, this time when I jaywalk, it won't get me. So you start to look at your experience in another way and say, my God, that's me. How many times have I done that? And they talk about Jim. Steps 1, 2, 3, drink. 1, 2, 3, drink. 1, 2, 3, drink. 1, 2, 3, drink. Decision followed by no action. Jim tells us to carefully review what led up to the first drink. And they lead you into something behind that. It says, the bottom line is we really don't know why we take the drink. We've talked about that. I drink when I'm on top of the world, and I drink when I'm on the bottom. I drink when I got money, and I drink when I don't. And I drink when she's my life, and I drink when she's not. I drink when Dad's alive, I drink when he's dead. I drink. That's what I do. I don't need a reason to drink. And so you begin to look at that idea, and then it goes a little bit further and, you know, talks about a guy named Fred. I've always liked Fred. Now, my story is not like Fred's, but I can relate to this. The day that Fred picked up a drink, there wasn't a cloud on the horizon. Life was going good. You know, he had the woman in his life he wanted, and he had the career he wanted, and he had finances and all that other kind of stuff, and he'd had a great day. Crossed the threshold of a room. His mind said, it'd be nice to have a little cocktail before dinner. And goes on to say there was nothing he could do but act on that. 6 days later, he wound up in a taxi cab in New York City, asking himself, how did he get here? See? So those of you who are feeling great and your life is very manageable today, and there's not a cloud in the horizon, you're like him too. And then they finally describe the alcoholic mind. When they say the main problem centers in the mind, the alcoholic mind, and then they describe it. It's called a strange mental blank spot. And in a strange mental blank spot, all the self-knowledge and all the willpower and all the reasons to not drink and all your time away from a drink are going to be completely unavailable to you. And from that place you will drink. And then they sum us up in the bottom of page 43. Once more, Mark at certain times has no effective mental defense against the first drink. Is this your experience, Mark? Mark, has it been your experience in the last year? See, I submit to you that every single one of you in here in the last year, if you took this into prayerful consideration and said, God, show me the number of times last year when I should have been drinking that I wasn't through your grace and love, you'll be shown some. Because I don't know about you, but it didn't take much to move me toward a drink of alcohol. I've gone through a few things in the last year. We all have. You know, we go through things, right? Because life, that's just what life is. Ups, downs, lows, highs. See? And I didn't drink. My defense has to come from this power greater than myself. And so, you know, you sit with that. And then, you know, they talk about the unmanageability of our life. The idea that that's an internal condition. It can manifest externally, but it's an internal condition. Some of the words that are used to describe it are restless, irritable, discontent. Some of the stuff on page 52, the bedevilments, having trouble in personal relationships. I've added a new one to that I like to look at, and that is that what's the condition of your internal dialogue that you have with yourself? How would you like to have a printout of that to pass out to friends? I've often thought about that. We're in a meeting of AA and the topic is God, right? And somehow we could flash up on the screen just 15-second blips of what's going through every member's mind in there. They'd just go lock us up somewhere. And the topic is God, right? You know. But are you having trouble in personal relationships? Where are you at with this internal dialogue you're having with yourself, your thought life? Trouble in personal relationships. How is that? Start with the one with yourself. What kind of relationship are you having with yourself in every area of your life? The mental relationship, your thought life, if you will. The emotional relationship you're experiencing with yourself. The physical relationship you have with yourself. Start with yourself first. How do you do in taking care of yourself? Right? From there, begin to look at other relationships. Significant others. Begin to look at your relationships at work. You know, there's a great exercise if you're in delusion about page 52. Go up to 10 people who care about you if you have that many left, and all right, terrible. And say to them, I have a question for you, and you can tell them some guy put you up to this. Say, I'm real curious how I show up to you, and have a notebook and be a little prayed up first. And do that with about 5 or 10 people. And you may be real surprised. Very, very surprised. That's an exercise I like to give people. How am I showing up to you? How do I show up to you in this relationship? See? I did that with my employees about a year ago. Then I had to write inventory when they gave me the responses. Thank God that I'm open and minded enough to do that. Because there was some stuff I needed to look at that I was asleep to. Thank God I'm not open minded, right? But how is it with your emotional nature? How is it with money? Making a living, making a life. How is it with being full of fear? You still go through the day packed full of fear. Little vulture starts talking to you in the morning. About time you got up. Got some things I want to say to you, you know. We all got that little guy, right? You know. We do Theater of the Lie today. It's basically kind of like a board meeting. You've all had several today. It started first thing this morning, your board meeting. And most of you have 1 or 2 main people that call the meeting to order. And it's not always the spiritual man or woman, I can assure you, right? You know, sometimes the Four Agreements talks about it's the judge. Get up, we've got things to talk about. That Joe Hawk brought up all those unfinished amends. Sit down, I got to talk to you. I must have had 90 come up to me and said, oh, I got all these up. I'm going, boy, you had a fun meeting this morning, didn't you? You know? Judge is saying, see, I told you needed to have made that amend, damn it. Right? You have those kind of dialogues. You know, how is it with all that stuff? You know? You're going to sit and take a look at that. Call it the unmanageability of your life. Call it the spiritual malady. Can you be at peace with yourself? Where are you at with this need for approval and acceptance that'll lead you to be dishonest with others, not authentic and genuine? You know, where are you at with all that? You know, so you sit and you look at that experience, and you get done with that, and you're faced with a question that is: do you need power? Are you interested in any of this changing? Would you like to get involved with that process? Yeah. Is lack of power your dilemma? Is lack of power your dilemma? Great question. See, my experience is this. Anything that you're going to look at in the first step that perhaps you would like to see change in your life, it is not a question of knowledge. I don't care what it is. For me, it has always been lack of power. See, for example, weight, May 11th, came into my consciousness. I want to lose some weight. I know more about nutrition than a nutritionist. So what? My deal was lack of power. May 11th, through some work, some stuff, I go on a diet, lost 21 pounds. Power. It took power. It didn't take knowledge. I didn't need knowledge, right? See, power, lack of power in my dilemma. Is that my dilemma? And you're going to sit down, you're going to look at that thing, and you look at this idea, and those of you who've been sober for a while, we have moral and philosophical convictions galore, right? All our memory of all of our past experiences and blah, blah, blah. And how's that working today? You know? And you're going to look at the idea that is there a power greater than myself that I'm willing to tap into, that'll take me into areas of consciousness and that I know nothing about. And I'm willing to choose to make that power everything. And then the promise in there is that if I'm willing to seek that power through a course of action, the power will reveal itself to me, through me, to me and through me. And then you look at the third step, the idea of, am I convinced that any life based on self-will cannot and will not work? And a page and a half in there, what that looks like. You know what I mean? If my arrangements would only stay put. If these people would only do as I wish, the show would be great. Everybody, including me, would be pleased. Life would be wonderful. Goes on and on and on. And then in the third step, you finally look at what's the root of the problem, your selfishness, self-centered. Am I going through life being driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, self-pity? Do I believe that all my troubles are my own making? Do I believe that above everything I need to get rid of this selfishness? And if so, do I believe that only God makes that possible through the process of the rest of the steps? Sit with that. You know, do I have to have God's help? 20 years sober, do I have to have God's help again going through this process? And then you make your decision, the bottom of 62. What is that, right? That from hereafter in this drama called life, new life, reborn this morning, we got up, right? God's going to be the director and I'm the actor. God's the principal, I'm the agent. God's the father, I'm the child. God's the employer, I'm the employee, and that's the deal. Am I willing to do that? Am I willing to stand on that relationship? Am I willing to assume my responsibility for my part in that deal? And if so, then we're going to say that prayer, right? We're going to offer ourselves to God to build with us and do with us as God wants. Do with us as God wants. Why would any person make that kind of statement to this power? Think about that. It's God, I offer myself to thee. You build with me and you do anything with me you want. Why would we do that? Because we once again have come up with a life driven by self-will and the consequences of it and the suffering of that. That's why. That's why we become willing to say that. Relieve me of the bondage of self so I can better do your will. The bondage of self and everything that comes along with that. That sense of separation. There's some of you sitting in this room today surrounded by people that are feeling completely alone and separated. That illusion that there's anything but oneness. The pain of that. The huge pain of that. Of being separate from. Bondage of self. So I can better do your will. Take away my difficulties so that victory over them bears witness to those I would help of God's power, God's love, and God's way of life. May I do thy will always. So that's kind of the methodology in the first three-step considerations.
Good morning. I'm Joe. I'm an alcoholic. Good to be here. So where do you go for rejuvenation? If sleep is all you got, you sleep more and more and more, you get more and more tired. Oh, I have a busy morning. My kids get up. They're always up by 7. I have to be at work at 8. Get up an hour before your kids and do an hour meditation and see if it isn't worth 3 hours of sleep. I met people who don't sleep anymore. Swear to God, in India. I know a man who hasn't laid down or slept in 40 years. He reaches a state twice a day in meditation. Doesn't need sleep anymore. I've had times where I take 2 hours of sleep, 18 hours of practice. 4 hours of study, running a newspaper, running a restaurant, starting a drug and alcohol program. Double your meditation, you feel more space and time in your life. You'd think you'd be taking time away. No, you're adding time. I'll give you some examples. You ever been watching a movie and like 20 minutes go by and you've missed it, but you were right there? And what did I miss, darling? What did I miss? You ever had times where you wake up in the morning, you're looking at the clock, and it's going like really quick. 1 minute is like it's 1 minute past 7, and you just take a moment and it's like 25 after and you got to go. But you ever had those times where it's like 1 minute past 7 and then it's still 1 minute past 7? Like 20 minutes go by and it's only 5 after 7. What is that? Does time change? Mind change. Only thing that can change. They're not going to change. This isn't going to change. Smacker, huh? You got to wake up. You know what you got to do to wake them up? You got to shake them up. Right? You got to shake them up to wake them up. What shakes you up? Questions, not answers. Answers are too comfortable, too easy. What's the problem? Oh, I know. You just end up with what you already know, right? Where I go for rejuvenation is prayer and meditation. I used to watch many people come to my house in Santa Monica. I'm not saying this at all to brag. I kept track of 200 that made it to the 9th step. Now, I didn't sponsor 200 people. Most of them I was not their sponsor. They just wanted to go through the work. I can't tell you. There was probably 300 or 400 that pooped out somewhere in 1 through 4. 200 made it to amends. This isn't a testament to my great work. It's a testament to all we did was what was in here. I kept track of those 200 until I went to India, because I'd call them on their birthdays, and sometimes they'd stay in touch. Sometimes they'd become their own sponsor and take themselves through the work. Where's Larry? No, I'm just kidding. But we both know it's about God. It's about God being the director. How can they make the decision that God's going to be the director and then you're still their director or their principal or their father? Yeah. You got to let that go too as the sponsor just as much as the sponsee. So where do I go for rejuvenation? Where is my refuge? My refuge is within and without. Sometimes somebody would come over and they leave and you feel drained. You're just like sucked by these power suckers that just want to suck power rather than experience power. Especially if you're accidentally working with an Al-Anon. Now, Al-Anon's working with Al-Anons. Al-Anons working with Al-Anons get a tremendous amount of power from each other, right? But an alcoholic working with an Al-Anon, because we forget sometimes we're their drug, right? I was engaged to one. I'll tell you how clear she got in the first step. She discovered a physical craving that would take place in her body for the energy of an alcoholic. That's what they live on. That's their drug. That's why there's so many Al-Anons hanging around in AA. And my buddy asked her a question once, why do so many of you Al-Anons end up in AA groups? And she got a look on her face like, you dumb son of a gun. And she tried to put it in words that he would understand. She thought, I could tell she was thinking. And she said, well, what would you do to stay in a bar with a free tab? This is their bar. We're their drug, right? Then sometimes somebody would come over to your house you're working with and they leave and you're just full. Now, why is that? Because you're putting in the same amount they are. You're not doing the work for them. Follow one principle when you're working with others. Never put in more than they are. But be there for them with all your heart. Be willing to go to hell with them. See, for me to look at the first step with somebody who's looking at it for their first time, I got to go to a place that I'm not in anymore. Because I don't live in what it was like. But when you're new, that's all you got is what it was like. See, I got what happened, I have experience, strength, and hope. My hope is in what it's like now. My strength is in what happened. My experience is in what it was like. What happened was something came between me and alcohol and drugs 20 years ago. Tradition 1 talks about, maybe I should read it properly. Our common welfare should come first. Personal recovery, your recovery, depends upon AA unity. That can be in this room, in your group, AA as a whole. But I believe that some of the problems that some of the groups that are represented in this room by the 5 heads of the 5 families, I believe that some of the problems because they don't see that the first tradition also works opposite. I'll tell you what I'm talking about. If my personal recovery depends upon the unity of the group that I belong to, then doesn't it work the other way around? Isn't unity dependent on personal recovery? Have you ever seen many groups with much unity when there wasn't personal recovery going on within the group that wanted unity? So what's going to solve these problems, these conflicts, this gossip and these problems between these groups, is each individual's continued personal recovery. Because unity also depends on personal recovery as much as personal recovery depends upon unity. Works both ways. You can locate yourself the first time through the work by going 1 through 9. Step 1 locates you bodily, mentally, spiritually. Faith. Where's your faith? 2. Where's your life run on self-will? 3. What's the truth in your inventory? 4. But if you've been around for a while, you can locate yourself by going backwards through the considerations. One thing I should say about what was talked about last night. By finishing amends, we don't mean there won't be any more. And by finishing amends, we don't mean that some aren't ongoing for the rest of your life. I put my mother through some stuff. I spoke to my mother one time through a plate glass window in the Michigan State Penitentiary on a telephone and saw in her eyes harm that I never thought could be healed. She passed away June 9th. We were free and clear. There was valid pain. There was valid grief. But it wasn't grief filled with selfishness. It wasn't grief filled with guilt. Because she and I were clear. Last time I saw her, 2 years ago, last month, she was so clear she looked at me and said, "This will be the last time we see each other." No drama. "Oh, I'll never see." No, she just like when your mother's clear. She went in an amazing way I want to talk about tomorrow. So how do you locate yourself going back through the work? You take yourself where you are. Let's say there's a couple people, as we saw last night by a few hands that went up, that have gotten to the other side of one set of amends or a couple times. And you're in 10, 11, and 12, but you're having some struggle. Or let's say the majority of this room have done 1 through 9.5. They think they've had a spiritual awakening as a result of the steps. They've had a spiritual awakening, but they've had a spiritual awakening as a result of 1 through 9.5, or however far they are, and you're struggling with some amends. Or let's say some of you are in the room, you're struggling with inventory. It's never the step that you're on that you're having struggle with unless you just flat don't know the mechanics. Everyone in this room knows the mechanics. That's not what we wanted to cover this weekend. If you don't know the mechanics, there's a lot of people in this room to go to. Right? Let's say you're stuck on some amends. Let's say you're stuck on inventory. Go backwards through the considerations. For example, got 10 amends left? It's not because... Do you know where they are? Yeah. Sometimes there's questions about I need to find them. The book talks about that. I got an inventory. I'm struggling with it. I can't finish it. Do you know how to write it? Yeah. So I have these amends. Do you know where they are? Yep. You know how to make amends? Yep. Are you willing? That's where you are. And you're really probably not willing because you're not sure what you really asked in 6 and 7. Because it's not 8 that you're not clear on. Because if you're not willing, there's something missing 6 and 7. And if you're getting a little flaky about 6 and 7, it's probably because you might have withheld something from 5 that you're now fighting with that you're not being honest about. And that probably was because maybe your writing wasn't quite thorough. And you're going back on some of that. The selfishness, the dishonesty, the self-seeking, and the fear didn't really have anything to do with drinking again. Now. It was true when I was in the fifth step. It was true when I was in the inventory. Step 1 was true when I was in step 1, but I've somehow moved past the truth in step 1 rather than deeper into the truth. I've had times where I'm in 9 and 1 is more, not 1 like when you're miserable because there's 2 through 8 connected to it, but 1 where the consciousness of it is deeper in 10, 11, and 12 than when I was in 1. And maybe you're struggling with 9 because you've gone back on your decision in step 3. Maybe you didn't really decide what it says to decide there. And maybe you didn't really choose God as everything because of these. Maybe these are men's that are unfinished or connected to you. You've gone back on your choice in the second step because your life's becoming a little more manageable and you're feeling a little better emotionally. And maybe you were just an emotional drinker. Or maybe you were just a circumstantial drinker. And now that the emotions have straightened out and the circumstances are better, maybe now you could drink like a normal person because you're not quite clear on the first half of step 1 anymore. It always goes back to 1. I got 3 Texas jokes. I've been living there long enough to tell jokes about Texas. In Texas, Chris will correct me if I'm wrong, but in Texas, sometimes people spend more time introducing themselves with their introduction than they do sharing. Right? Is that right? Go. By the grace of God and the fellowship of this program and people like you and the 12 steps and the 12 traditions, I haven't found it necessary to take a drink since August 17th, 1982. Old boy in the room says, I saw you in the bar last week. You were drinking. He said, it just wasn't necessary, though. Wasn't necessary. Someone said something to me the other day in Texas. I thought I was going to go crazy. You know what they said to me? Is it hot enough for you? No, I thought to myself, I'd like it to be just a little hotter, right? I'd like to be just like melting while I'm standing here talking to you. Is it hot enough for you? That's a crazy question. Here's the worst one. Supreme Court recently banned executing retards, right? One Texas says to the other, where are we going to find our fun now? Right? They'll execute some retards, and it's a wide expanse to fit into that category in Texas. Right? They'll execute some retards. If you're retarded, don't go to Texas. If you're retarded and you live in Texas, be really careful. Right? Sorry. Some of these unsigned death pacts, the lies that we don't want to share with each other. You don't say anything to make me uncomfortable. I won't say anything to make you uncomfortable. Here's how it goes. And I was just in a house where this is true. Sponsor lives in one part of the house. Sponsee lives in the other part of the house. And the sponsor has an idea that the sponsee's been stealing some of his cigars. He says, how am I going to handle this? He thinks. He screams out, my sponsee's been stealing my cigars. Nothing happens. My sponsee's been stealing my cigars. Nothing happens. He goes across the house into the sponsee's room and he says, did you hear anything? Sponsee says, I didn't hear anything. You didn't hear anything just then. He said, I didn't hear anything. He said, okay, I want you to go in my room and yell out something as loud as you can. And I'm going to sit here in your room. I'm going to see if I can hear you. This is too ironic, isn't it? Sponsee goes in the sponsor's room and goes, my sponsor's messing with my girlfriend. My sponsor's messing with my girlfriend. Goes back where the sponsor is in his room and says to the sponsor, did you hear anything? He said, I didn't hear nothing. Would you like to have a cigar? That's nasty, man. I'm sick enough to have made notes about that shit, right? You thought I was trying to figure out the book? I don't need to figure out this thing anymore, right? That's my problem. My problem's the trap of knowledge. How do you get past the trap of knowledge if you've done some work? Oh, I know what to do with the doctor's opinion. I'm going to mark it all up and get all the questions marked right? Go through the questions. Pray for an open mind and a new experience. Some questions might come out of the doctor's opinion you didn't see the first time. There might be some questions the second time through the work or the third time through the work, or the reason you're stuck in amends because there's some new reservations. Maybe there's reservations at 5 years that you wouldn't even bring up to somebody that was doing the work the first time. Give you an example. I'm going through the work one time with a buddy of mine from my home group in Santa Monica, and he looked at me and he said, You know that place in the book where it says he thought his long period of sobriety had qualified him to drink like other people? He said, you're not suffering from that delusion. You think your long period of sobriety has qualified you to not drink like other people, and if you do this, the right spiritual practice with the right teacher, you can keep yourself sober like a normal person could. Wow, he had me. Right? Maybe lurking notions, maybe reservations change each time through the work. Maybe now after 20 years I've learned enough to control my drinking. Right? So we talked last night about where it starts. For me, it starts with 4 considerations. 5, actually. He asked me to make them a couple months ago. Is this work what I want to do? Maybe I don't. How can I come to the work now after this many times from have to? I don't have to do the work. So once you see through an illusion, you got to come back to it with a different motivation. My mind goes like this. If I've finally seen that meetings don't keep me sober, shit, why go to meetings? No. A healthy relationship with AA, Bill Wilson wrote about it. Our founder had some real struggles getting free of his dependence on the program of Alcoholics Anonymous that he started. He said a healthy relationship goes like this. Have to, need to, want to, love to. My teacher always says to me, when you see through the illusion, you got to come back to it with a different motivation. Big book, steps, sponsor, meetings, don't keep me sober. My alcoholic mind says, then I don't need to go to meetings, have a sponsor, read the book, or work the steps. No, you come to them from a different motivation. I do these things to seek a deeper relationship with the thing that keeps me sober. I come to it from maybe the second time through the work it's because you need to. You'll never have the desperation you had the first time. You're not going to get yourself back into it. You're not going to be able to work it up into an emotional state because all it'll be is memory and emotion. And we already know the memory of a week ago ain't going to keep us sober. Think it through. I got the kind of mind, I don't know about you, if I was to think my next drunk through, I'd just say, fuck it. Take a drink. Thinking it through depresses me like positive affirmations make me feel. Yeah. I've read positive affirmations and felt like a piece of... You're the perfect child of the universe. No, I'm not. No, I'm not. I've always thought they should have a... Maybe I'm going to write it before I'm 25 years sober. I'm going to write a daily affirmation book for alcoholics that you would feel better after reading. You're a piece of shit. You'll never amount to nothing. Because you know you're a little better than that. But you're not a perfect child of the universe who's loved by everybody. Right? Yeah. Today's going to be worthless. You're not going to accomplish anything. And everything after that's going to be uphill. Right? I think I'm going to write that. Right? Joe Hawk's Positive Affirmations for Real Alcoholics. Right? You don't need to do the work today. Forget 10, 11, and 12. Everything's going to be hunky-dory. And you might find out, because you're in the grace of God, that that's true too. Don't beat yourself up for not being rigid. Be free. Do what you want. You should. You should. 10, 11, and 12 are a requirement based on some kind of fear. It's going to be horrible. Oh, I'm going to drink. Mark told me if I don't do 10, 11, and 12, I'm going to drink again. No, you're past that. You've recovered. You're in a state of neutrality. Do it out. So then then I'm just not going to do it. No, come to it from a different motivation. What about going through the work based on your love for God before you're all fucked up and have to do the work again? What about doing the work from love? Have to, need to, want to, love to. Maybe this time you're going to do it just because you want to. You want to see what's on the other side of the work this time, right? I can't open this right now, but you get to the doctor's opinion, you open your heart up with a prayer for an open mind and a new experience. Different statements are going to pop up each time through the work. Find the ones that speak to you. Maybe there'll be some new ones. Maybe you'll find that a statement, let's say for an example, if you don't find ease and comfort, the same ease and comfort you used to get from drinking, there's very little hope for your recovery. What if this time the consideration was, I have found more ease and comfort in my life than drinking or drugs ever gave me, but now ease and comfort have become a noose around my neck that I'd like to get past because I'm worshiping ease and comfort, and I have fallen victim to the belief that if it feels good, it's good, and if it feels bad, it's bad. Maybe that question comes out of the doctor's opinion. Let the doctor's opinion speak to your heart. Let the big book meet you. It's one of these books, and we've all read other books. There's very few, though. It's one of these books that meets you where you are, whether it's the first time and you're lucky enough not to know much about AA. Don't you love to work with those people that haven't been fucked up by the fellowship yet? Just like wet, ready. They don't know. You been to AA? No. Oh, thank God. Right? Right? They're much easier to work with than some idiot with 20 years that has all these ideas about what he thinks he knows. Right? Mark said to me, just a few months ago, when I asked him to take me through the work, he said, I'm at a loss to what to do with you. I thought, because I'm a challenge. He said, no, you know too much. You know too much. You better pray. Damn, he kept me in that fucking prayer until I was just like... You know how I knew I was ready to take the third step with him the other day? I said to my roommate in Terrell, Texas, I'm really looking forward to starting my inventory. Never said that before in 20 years, right? That's when you know you're ready for inventory. Oh, I've taken the third step, but my inventory is going to be terrible. It's going to be horrible. I'm going to be all messed up in inventory again. You don't have to. You don't have to. You'll never do the work for the first time again. Even those of you in the room that don't think the amends that are left in your gut at 3 o'clock in the morning have anything to do with booze, but you've run out of power in step 9 and you can't make any more, and you just need kind of an oomph. You got to go back through. It took me starting the work twice to get through it once. Right? Maybe some of you have had to start it 4 times to get through it once. Maybe some of you have thought you've done it 3 times, but you haven't done it once. Right? Doctor's opinion, you turn statements into questions that meet your heart. Bill's story, you go back to your drunkalogue in the first 9 pages, and the next 9 pages, use it as a barometer. This is a great thing for the person that's taking you through. Mark anything in 9 to 16 you're resistant to do that he did. Because all you're going to get in 9 to 16 is what's going to come in the rest of the work. It's a great barometer for the sponsee and the sponsor. And you know, when they marked everything in 9 to 16, there's still one that bothers me every time it's time for me to do the work. To admit again that in and of myself I am nothing, and that without God I'm lost. And I'm not saying 9 to 16, for some of you, there'll be a lot of stuff that you're absolutely unwilling to do. I'm saying the stuff you feel a little resistant to, that pulls on you. Mark it. You know why it's a great barometer? When you're done with step 1, go back and see if there's any resistance left in 9 to 16. 17 to 23, all you got to do is be convinced of one thing to go on past page 23. Does your experience abundantly confirm that once you put alcohol in your system, something happens where you lose control over the amount once you start. Then do it all with drugs, if you had both involved. I don't want to spend a bunch of time on the debate. You're either alcoholic or you're not. You're either a real addict or you're not. But the page that helped me, because I've had the physical craving for drugs. You can't do the kind of drugs. But here's the thing, though. My mother would get a physical craving for crack cocaine. She's not a real addict. Anybody shooting cocaine is going to get a physical craving. My first time through the work, I saw I had the physical craving for alcohol. I had the physical craving for drugs. So far, I think Don and I are going to find that I'm an alcoholic and an addict. I've had the mental obsession for drugs. When you have a habit, a physical habit for heroin, you know about the mental obsession. When you shoot cocaine, you know about the mental obsession. So I'm all the way to page 43. And I'm thinking, I'm going to find out I'm an alcoholic addict. That's okay. That'll be my truth. I'll do the work. He went back to one page that separates the men from the boys, the girls from the real women. The moderate, the moderate, the hard, and the real alcoholic. I didn't have any debate whether I was a moderate drinker or a moderate drug user. We get to the real addict. I've had the habit badly enough to gradually impair me physically and mentally. I've had big habits. Could have killed me a few years before my time, but here's what separated me from the real addict. Given a sufficiently strong reason, can you stop? That doesn't mean the reason that brought you to AA. Everybody's here with a sufficient reason that brought him here. The question would be, would the sufficient reason that brought you to Alcoholics Anonymous by itself be enough for you to stay stopped now? Without any spiritual nothing. They even give you a test in the book to find out. Just leave it alone for a year or so. Right? The drinking test I don't believe in anymore. There's one of my old ideas that's not old anymore. If an alcoholic is sober, and I believe they're in the grace of God. Now, if somebody's still drinking with a certain pattern and they want to find out whether they're alcoholic or not, have them stop abruptly and try some controlled drinking. But if somebody's in the grace of God because they're sitting here sober, how do you know if they took the test and they passed that they weren't safe and protected by God and they passed the test? And you killed them because you gave them a test to somebody who's in the grace of God. Because I know people who've drank in the grace of God and there was no craving. I don't believe in Marty Mann's test for somebody who's sober and in the grace of God. I believe in Marty Mann's test the way she wrote it. And she didn't say 2 drinks a day for 30 days. I read Marty Mann's primer on alcoholism, first edition. She said 2 drinks a day, same time, same amount, every day for 6 months while drinking to see if you can stop the pattern of the craving. Try to drink and stop abruptly. I don't believe in the test for people that are sober. There's better ways to find out. Leave the program, don't do any spiritual work, and see what happens to your spiritual condition. Right? 23 to 43? That's when it'll start to strike your heart. Because it's where we all are. I hope that for everybody in this room to look at the craving is either a not too far memory or a distant memory. And all you're going to get from it is memory, and if somebody can scare you enough into thinking that craving would still be true. Probably would. But where it always gets me is 23 to 43. So, am I a hard drinker? I had a habit for alcohol. It physically and mentally impaired me, but given a sufficient strong reason, I couldn't quit drinking. I couldn't even quit drinking on the sufficient reason that brought me here because I didn't quit drinking. I woke up one day, August 17th, 1982, scared to death because for the first time in 18 years I couldn't drink. I like Bill's description from my experience. I was separated from alcohol on August 17th, 1982. Every time I ever quit, I couldn't stay quit. So one has to do with the start, and one has to do with the stop. But do you believe now maybe you've acquired enough information, or enough power, or enough grace to drink like a normal person? Who in this room would ever want to drink like a normal person? Some people in this room had times when there was control, but did you enjoy it? And when you enjoyed it, were you controlling it? I never had both at the same time. Control and enjoy, right? Then you start to look at 44, 45, and 52. See, I don't suffer from a twofold disease. I do not suffer from a twofold disease, and the physical craving is not separate from the mental obsession. I've been to some groups, they'll tell you that the powerless part of the first step is the physical craving, and the unmanageability part of the first step is the mental obsession. Then where is everybody in the room that the mental obsession has been removed from? Where's your unmanageability? I'm sorry, my book happens to say on page 64 that I'm not only bodily and mentally ill, I'm spiritually sick. And when the spiritual malady is overcome, I'm going to straighten out mentally and physically. I have a threefold disease. You got to have two parts to be powerless. It's not having the physical craving or the mental obsession. And there's one of those traps we're going to look at when we come back after the break on page 44. If when you honestly want to, you can't quit entirely, or if when drinking you have little control over the amount, and somebody you're working with that's not quite clear yet after all those pages, they'll always say, see, it says or. You don't have to have both. You only got to have one or the other. But I'm going to tell you this. If you get the mental obsession on a regular basis, but you don't get a physical craving, then the next time you get a mental obsession, just drink the way you want to drink. And if you get the physical craving every time you drink, but there's no mental obsession, then just make up your mind, go on with your life, and have a happy time, because you can keep yourself stopped. You got to have both to be powerless. And my life happens to be unmanageable because of something much deeper than circumstance, emotion, how things are going, how I feel, how you feel about me, whether you love me or not. That's called a spiritual malady beyond emotion or circumstance. Some of you drink when she stays. Some of you drink when she leaves. Some of you don't know which one's the celebration and which one's the depression. And sometimes they're interchangeable. I'm depressed when she's there. I'm depressed when she leaves. I want her to come back. Then I'm depressed. I want her to leave again. I'm still depressed. It's because I'm fucking depressed. I take me with me wherever I go. Right? You drink because the team won. Yankees won, you drink. Yankees lose, you drink. You know the days I like to drink? When I just need to feel something because everything is just kind of, right? How many in the room on depressive medication, sober? That's a reservation about a human power being able to relieve your alcoholism. Unless you have a valid chemical imbalance. Do the work. Finish 9. See if it was untreated alcoholism or something that really needs to be treated. I'm not a doctor. I'm not going to tell you how to get off it. I'm going to tell you, though, 80% of those on medication have a lurking notion about their first step, and they're looking for something human to relieve what they suffer from. And I've seen a lot of you do 1 through 9 and find out the symptoms were just untreated alcoholism because they're so similar. There's a difference between alcoholism and drug addiction. If there isn't, then how come there's alcoholics in this room that could take or leave drugs? And how come there's drug addicts in this room that could take or leave alcohol? It's only different in one respect, the physical craving. The mental obsession an alcoholic and an addict can talk about all day long. The spiritual malady an alcoholic and an addict can talk about all day long. But I need to talk to a guy that knows what it's like to wake up in the morning craving alcohol, not needing to go get a hit of crack. Why? Because I made up my mind and I walked away from cocaine. Some people are both. Use the pages with both. Find out what you are. Let's come back at 10:30. Just a couple things, and then Mark's going to move on with the mechanics of 4 through 9. Then we can get to experience. If in any way I offended anybody when I used the word retard, I will tell you this. I shared it that way because I was offended also, and that's the way it was being referred to. The idea that there should be any debate about that is as crazy as should there be any debate about what's going on with priests nowadays, that controversy. The idea that it's even something to debate. I remember seeing a paper that said, Supreme Court makes controversial decision about execution. And I thought, my God, how insane things have gotten, you know? A lot of people will say sometimes when you meet somebody they've heard you share in a meeting, and you talk about, let's say they come up to you and say, what does it mean to go through the work? You say, we're going to start on the title page, and we're going to go through the first 164 pages, and we're going to do what it says and follow the directions and answer the questions. But then the first thing you give them is a prayer that's not necessarily in the book. I would like to say that there's many places in the book that refer to getting past their old ideas, laying aside prejudice. Many places in there. That's why I encourage people to do the set-aside prayer in their own words, in their own way, to whatever they believe in, as long as they understand the idea that maybe they're there because they would like, maybe it's the first question. Would you like to have an open mind and a new experience? Because what's the thing that they say in the spiritual experience in the appendix? There's one thing that'll keep you in everlasting ignorance, and that's contempt prior to investigation. And don't think you'll have that kind of contempt only the first time. There'll just be new, fancier, slicker, better sounding contempt. Better sounding reservations. I would like to paint a picture. I like pictures. I like to be able to see the picture in my mind. Mark and I were talking just a minute ago about a lot of people are having a lot of questions about their first step. Let me say once again, that's a reflection that you're having an experience. Those that are still stuck in what they absolutely know when they got here on Friday night are just getting some new information. Maybe the questions will be asked later. If there's doubt, it's good, because alcoholics always know the answer to everything. But we could take not only the rest of the weekend, it would take us a week, and we would have to meet with each of you individually. And it would be a great delusion on our part to think that we can settle your first step questions. There is only one ultimate authority that can answer your first step questions, and it's not your sponsor, and it's not the person taking you through the work. It's God expressing Himself in your group conscience. Mark's going to describe that group a little later. I believe everybody in that group needs to be convinced to their innermost self. And keep in mind, the big book contains the long form of the 12 traditions and the short form of the 12 traditions. The big book also contains the short form of the 12 steps and the long form of the 12 steps. Because most of you in this room know there's a lot more to step one than just admitting that you're powerless over alcohol. And one of the great things in the first step that I was just talking about and Mark was talking about, there's a difference between you getting a physical craving for booze when you drink booze than you being powerless over where alcohol takes you when you put it in your body back to what you really like. I'll say that again. There's a difference between having a physical craving once you start to drink and all that. Don't get lost in the word physical craving. Someone asked me at the break, is the physical craving for crack the same feeling as the physical craving for alcohol? No. There's probably no stronger. I don't know about crack. I don't know if there's any crack addicts here, but there's many of you that look crack-ish. I know that. I don't want to call anyone a crack addict. But I know this. I know this. I know what the rush is like. I know what the physical craving is like after you shoot some cocaine. It's not the same after you take a few drinks. So don't get lost in how it feels. Don't get lost in the technical term physical craving or phenomena of craving. It's only simple. When you take a hit of crack, do you lose control over the amount that you're going to end up doing once you start? Does it go past what you want? You set out to do this much, can you just do that much? Same with booze. Don't get lost in the word physical craving. Don't worry what it feels like. Some of us at different progressions of our disease, it feels different. Sometimes, and some of you have been there, your system is so messed up, you take 2 drinks, you're flat on your face because it's all messed up. Sometimes you set out to get really drunk because you're with the right guys. You can't take that. You can't drink that much anymore. The simple question is, do you lose control over the amount you're going to drink once you start? And can you keep yourself stopped once you stop? So what I found, my truth, it can't be your truth. Some of you will find you're both. Some of you will find one, you're the other. My truth was this. I am a real alcoholic. Physically, once I take a drink, I lose control over the amount. Mentally, I can't keep myself stopped once I stop. Spiritually, I relate to the spiritual malady. But there's millions of people in the world in churches and therapy offices that suffer from the spiritual malady that you could talk to about the spiritual malady. They would understand everything on page 52, but it doesn't mean they're alcoholic. Which leads me to believe, just because the spiritual malady was there before I ever drank, that my admission about alcoholism has something to do with how I drank alcohol once I started and what would happen with me and alcohol when I would stop. Right? Find your truth. Mark and I can't bring you to your truth. Your sponsor can't bring you to the truth with the first step. God can show it to you. You can fully concede to your innermost self. And fully conceding to your innermost self that you're an alcoholic, an addict, or both, Al-Anon, whatever it might be, is a little different than admitting that you're powerless. The other thing I wanted to mention, and here's the picture I'd like to draw. You see the craving. You see the obsession. You see the truth. My truth would be, if I want to get technical, I am a real alcoholic who was a hard drug user. I had the habit for drugs. It physically impaired me, mentally impaired me, just a little. It could have killed me before my time, but given a sufficiently strong reason, I was able to stop. That's my truth. Then you start to look at page 52. Not what it was like then, currently. Where are you with page 52 now? Let's call that the manifestations of the current unmanageability. And I would like you to watch that list. You should write it out. Some people need to write paragraphs about each of those areas. What is it like with relationships? My emotional nature, misery and depression, making a living that's satisfying, that you feel passionate about, being of help to other people, fear. So sometimes you got to write paragraph form and then pull out a list. Because here's what I'd like you to watch. I would like you to watch, and we'll get to it. I would like you to watch that the list of current unmanageability, which is the spiritual malady as you're currently experiencing it, will be a direct reflection of your current agnosticism. Doesn't it make sense? If you had full faith, you wouldn't be having trouble in that area. The current unmanageability will reflect your current agnosticism. Your current agnosticism will reflect where you're running your life on self-will when you look at step 3. It will then put names on it, and some of it, just the way you have it written, will become your first column, which will become your fear inventory, which you'll see how you take into each relationship, which will become your amends list. I would like you to see how it grows and changes, but it's basically the list you make of the current unmanageability will be the list of agnosticism, self-will, resentment, fear, relationships, and it'll turn into your 8-step list.
When I was on the break, I was talking with a gentleman who drank last night, and he said some great stuff. I asked him to tell me a little bit about it, and he said he had 3 years, and then he drank, and we were talking, and he was talking about, he seems to be a struggle with God, and I said, well, tell me about that. And he said, well, when I first came in, the first year or two, he said it was like I knew God, and there was no face and no name. And then he said I started reading all these spiritual books, and I became a spiritual wreck. And he said I ultimately, relapsed. And thought that was interesting. Second step, this idea of putting God in a box, defining, comprehending. If you ask me today, do I have any concept of God, I would say absolutely not. None. Because any concept I gave you would be formulated in my mind, and God is so much more than what my mind has to say about God. I have no concept of God. my experiences have been such that I have been stripped of every concept I ever had about God. And I've had many. Came into AA, I don't know, atheist probably, agnostic. Attempted church for a little while. I didn't fit in. Still remember one time a girl saying the most significant thing in her life was there were a few times she hadn't felt close to God, and I couldn't relate to that. And then I spent some time with Native American spirituality and then some Eastern stuff. Order of St. Benedict, Catholicism, and had an experience in '96 that was so profound that it stripped me of any donkey ever again. And that's just the way that went. I don't have any concept. It's an absolute knowing. There's a story I think that really sums this thing up about God. It's like Joe and I are swimming in water. And the water is God, right? And a new guy comes by. He says, "Hi, how you guys doing?" Oh, we're doing great. The water's great. And so, of course, he's got to look slick and cool. So he didn't understand what we mean by water, so he doesn't say anything. But then he swims up to another new guy, and he said, "We got to go find water." And the other guy says, "What are you talking about?" He says, "Well, those guys say the water's great. Where's the water?" You know, and that's my experience with God. You know, closer than breathing, and I got to go find God, right? That's not been my experience anymore. Through a course of action as outlined in steps 4 through 9, and working the disciplines of 10 and 11, is I became awake, aware, mindful, conscious of that which is closer to me than breathing, which is nameless and faceless and has no concept attached to it, if you will. I tell people to take a chill pill in the second step. You know, a drunk says to me they're struggling with God. My experience is that statement has nothing to do with God. It has a lot to do with your first step, though. If you're powerless over alcohol and your experience is such with an unmanageable life, and your experience is such that to drink is to die, you're going to get pretty open-minded about God. See, faced with an alcoholic death or open-mindedness. And the book, you know, the big book is so gentle. They say, pick your own concept, right? So how can you sit in the rooms and say you're struggling with God when you get to pick your own concept? You know, he doesn't say you have to believe in any kind of a God. You get to invent God. I mean, what greater act? Here, invent me. You come up with me. I don't care. And I'll rise to meet you from that position. That's really the second step. I want to read these some of these characteristics because it ties into the third step, and then I'm going to talk about steps 4 through 9. See if any of you suffer from any of these characteristics. Number 1, often become angry at or afraid of authority figures, and I will attempt to work them against each other in order to get my way. I seek approval and frequently lose my own identity in the process. Those of you that are in relationships. I'm able to make a good first impression, but unable to follow through. I have difficulty accepting personal criticism and become threatened and angry when criticized. I have an addictive personality, and I get driven to extremes at times. I'm self-rejecting and self-alienated. Often immobilized by anger and frustration, I'm rarely satisfied. I'm usually lonely even when surrounded by people. I'm a chronic complainer who blames others for what's wrong with my life. I feel unappreciated and think I don't fit in. I see the world as a jungle filled with selfish people who aren't there for me. See, this just kind of warms your heart, doesn't it? I see everything as a catastrophe, a life and death situation. I judge life in absolutes, black or white, right or wrong. I live in the past, why fearful of the future? What a horrible way to live. I have strong feelings of dependence coupled with exaggerated fears of abandonment. I fear failure and rejection. I don't try new things that may not turn out well. I'm obsessed with money and material things. I dream big plans and schemes, and I have little ability to make any of them happen. I cannot tolerate illness in myself or others. I prefer to charm superiors and intimidate subordinates. I believe that rules and laws are for others, not for me. I often get addicted to excitement and life in the fast lane. I hold emotional pain within, and I lose touch with my feelings. Anybody relate to that? Let me explain, if you relate, and all of us do. These are infantile traits that are continued into adulthood. The name of that article is called King Baby. And that's what we're going to begin to look at as we do inventory. I'll tell you what, it's tough looking the way I look and then acting like that at times. People get confused. He looked so much more mature than that. Why did you do that? Just unbelievable. It wasn't that long ago. My boss had asked me about something like for about $8 in my expense account, and I think 2.5 hours later, on my way to Austin, at least 2.5 hours later, I'd resigned and moved on. And I snapped to that. I said, "What is wrong with you? God, you're 55 years old. It's over 20 years. Look what you've done with this. He has a right to ask you about that, for God. He writes your check. Look what you've done with this, It's just crazy. This is important because we get drunk behind this, Chris R. was saying the other day, I'm really not interested in finding my inner child. I need to find my inner adult, and that's the truth. There's nothing wrong with being carefree like a child, but this infantile stuff that we bring into our life, regardless of length of sobriety, it's killing us. It's absolutely killing us in every sense of the word. And it ties back into, I want to read a few lines because I think it's so important to get the clarity of this as it relates to the fourth step. But this is really in the third step, and I'm on page 60, about this requirement that I must be convinced that my life run on self-will can hardly work. And it goes on and describes what it's like when you're living your life on self-will. And I think we just read a great description of the traits, and they're very infantile, that bring about self-will in us. But talks about, on that basis, me living my life on my will or playing God, I'm almost in collision with something or somebody, even though I have good motives. Boy, there's nothing worse than a drunk with a good motive, driven by self-will, right? It says, I try to live by self-propulsion. I'm like an actor, but I want to run the whole show. I'm forever trying to arrange the lights, the ballet, the scenery, and all the other people in my life in my own way. My group, AA, employers, all of that. And then here's my belief system. If my arrangements would only stay put, if only all these people would do as we wish, the show would be great. It warms my heart when I read that. Because we know it's so true. Everybody, and this next statement is one of the most delusional in the book, and it's a belief system we have. Everybody, including ourselves, would be pleased. If you want to test that, go ask these people who you're trying to arrange if they're pleased with your arrangements. And now they're going to describe the toolkit of self-will. I can be virtuous to get my way. I can be kind, considerate, patient, generous, even modest and self-sacrificing. Or I can be mean, egotistical, selfish, and dishonest. That's my toolkit of self-will. What usually happens? Well, this show didn't come off very well. I was talking with a gentleman the other day. I listened to a fifth step, and I said, the problem with people like us is is we're the director and written the script. Unfortunately, we never give it to any of the other actors. And they begin to do extraneous acting, and we get very upset with them for that, you know. So, but it says, well, what happens? This show doesn't come off very well. And because of that, I begin to think life is not treating me right. And I'm going to exert myself more. And I'm going to become, on the next occasion, exerting myself more, either more demanding or gracious. You know how we are. We evaluate the scene, and then we decide which tool we think will now work to get our way once again. I'll send her flowers, you know, that kind of thing. And it goes on and says, unfortunately, though, the play still does not suit us. Admitting we're somewhat at fault, we're absolutely sure, S-U-R-E, other people are much more to blame. And I become angry, indignant, and full of self-pity. And by the way, it always goes that way. When your self-will does not manifest and you're being driven, you'll start with anger. Anger will move into indignant. How dare they? How dare she? How dare he? And then ultimately you will sit at home or go to your meeting, and you'll then be into self-pity. Look at what I've done. Da-da-da. It says, what is my basic trouble? Is my trouble that I'm not really a self-seeker even when trying to be kind? Am I not a victim of it? And it says a delusion that I can wrest satisfaction and happiness out of this world if I only manage well. You know, I threw out a question for some of you to go ask people. How am I showing up in your life? That's tied into this question right here.